I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good, can't complain.
Sydney, thank you so much for doing this and for coming on live with me. Just side note, pretty sure it doesn't get cooler than getting married at Strand. I've been following you since your wedding planning, and
Mentioned that the other day.
so Sydney, you are the expert of yourself. So why don't you just give us a nice introduction of who you are so anyone who's just tuning in can have a better idea.
I am Sydney Magruder Washington. I'm a dancer, a writer, actor, advocate, musician, D all of the above at this point. And just like everybody else, I'm navigating my way through this pandemic and seeing what coming back looks like, if coming back makes sense, and trying to see what will be different on the other side of this for on every level of our industry. And it's hard to tell at this point.
Yeah, it's also a major anxiety point, I think, for me at least, right?
Oh, 100%. I don't like to think about it,
Yeah.
obviously for this, but part of the draw of going back is seeing friends and being back in community with people you know and love, and doing what you feel you're supposed to be doing. But it's also, I think everybody's anxious about what it looks like to get back, how they're going to feel and look, and I think that's more of the anxiety than anything.
Absolutely. So Sydney, we are going to cover a couple different topics, but I'd love to start with something that you are very vocal about on your account, and that's disordered eating. Do you remember this pivotal time when you started to connect the idea that food did have some impact on either the way your body looked or how your performance was in class?
You know what? It was actually, for me personally, it wasn't food until much later. I think it was just the idea of difference and otherness and being, one of few Black faces in a room. The older I got, the more alone I was. But it actually wasn't necessarily food for me. It was more of the idea of, without regard to what I eat, not regarding food at all, my body will be different. And that was more the problem than anything. The disordered eating, or the kind of tip into disordered eating, didn't come until I was actually much older.
Interesting.
Like a teenager, versus knowing and seeing that I was physically different as young as 7 or 8. And kind of not tipping into disordered eating, or kind of realizing that disordered eating was an option even until I was probably 14 or 15.
Yeah, so the disordered eating was almost just like this secondary tool that kind of erupted later on.
For sure. And I think that as it erupted, I realized, if I can eat differently, maybe I'll lose weight, maybe I'll look more like everyone else. And that obviously was an unsustainable goal, an unsustainable ideal. And I think that is the great kind of failure of our discipline as a global phenomenon. I think the great failure of our discipline is this kind of homogenized ideal of a female body.
100%. And how much of that is rooted in white elitism and the mere fact that, to, like what you said, to have what is quote unquote ideal in our mind to be so unrealistic, not even just for a white dancer, but very much for a Black dancer who.
And even the Black dancers who have that physique naturally are kind of weaponized against other Black dancers because, well, she looks like that, why can't you? We are two completely different people with two completely different sets of genes. I think I've seen that more than I've seen anything, especially recently, when you have Black dancers who do fit the ideal, either just by natural genetics or, they have struggled with disordered eating, but, nobody's going to say that out loud. Pitting Black dancers who have that physique naturally against Black dancers who do not. And that's a whole separate level of a conversation, but I've seen that happen more often than I'd like.
That's really interesting. I wasn't even really aware that was happening, to be honest with you.
Right. By virtue of you being white, you would have no real way of doing that. And that's thing that we as Black dancers bring to our white friends necessarily. Not because we don't trust you, not because we don't love you, but because you fundamentally will not understand purely by virtue of you being white. Like, it has to do with, you know, the depth of a friendship or how well you know someone. That is one of those things that as Black dancers, we kind of tend to keep to ourselves, because that is another level of what we're dealing with that you might not be dealing with.
Yeah, I have this white privilege. I also have major thin privilege. I want to be this voice in helping dancers, but at the same time, I really will never be able to understand at its core what it's like to be different in regards to being different in skin color or having a different type of body. And I think it's important to have voices who are just really being the shifters in our industry.
And you know what I think is kind of wild here is that our discipline has distorted it so much that I am the voice, and I have major thin privilege too. I can walk into any store I want and buy clothes.
Sure.
I worked at Yumiko for 2 years. I worked at Yumiko for quite some time, and you know, I have a box of leotards sitting in my closet that I bought from there. So the fact that I could be framed as a voice for dancers with non-normative bodies is absolutely ridiculous. Not saying that your assertion is ridiculous, but it's ridiculous, you know, that I could even stand here and have the audacity to claim. I would never claim that, but you know, to even have the audacity to do that is proof positive of how distorted our industry's body standards have become. Because there were times when I'll never forget this, when I first met my now wife, when we first met, and I was telling her some of the dreams I had or the thoughts. I remember telling her that I wanted to be a plus size model because I thought I was plus size, and I was probably about 20 pounds lighter than I am now. And that years ago. We met when I was 20. I was 20 and I had I was thin, and I thought that because of what I was surrounded by and because of what I had seen, that I would have to, if I wanted to be a model, which was, you know, a thought I once harbored, if I wanted to model or participate, that I would have to do so in a quote unquote plus size capacity, which is ridiculous, which is absolutely ludicrous. And the fact that I'm not the only person who felt that way, I know other Black dancers my size and you know, close, who felt that way, is ridiculous.
And I mean, just a matter of how skewed, not just the dance industry, but let's look at diet culture. I've been doing a lot of my own anti-racism work just over this past year. And it is so fascinating for me to honestly learn and admit that so much of what I learned through my dietetics program, and I know a lot of other white dietitians feel this way as well, is also so rooted in colonialism and white supremacy that it's, you know, even I have been having to reshift a lot of my recommendations just as a dietitian for dancers in order to step away from this idea. I mean, even just as a prime example, my plate, what the government has constructed as being my plate, where we have like our proteins and our carbohydrates and our fats, like all separated into these sections, that in of itself does not represent various cultures and how they eat. So even that is so rooted in colonialism, and it's really been very eye-opening for me, honestly, as a white dietitian, to start learning about this and learning that so much of what I learned, I feel like I am now honestly having to reteach myself a lot as I move forward in this career.
And that's the process for anybody. And I think the kind of secret that nobody wants to admit is so much of so many things that we've built as disciplines, ballet, dietetics, from, you know, lots of what we've built as disciplines are built on white supremacy. And if we dismantle those, we lose the discipline as we know it. I think the courage has to live in what does a reimagined discipline look like? And are we ready? The answer to the latter question is, of course we aren't. But is it possible? Yes. Are we ready for it? Absolutely not. I think individually there are people who stand out as being kind of, you know, light bearers in that way and standard bearers, you know, to that end. But I think as a general audience, are we ready for a dismantled and or decolonized version of the things we love?
Absolutely. You know, this idea also about reclaiming what we know, whether that means reclaiming the word fat or reclaiming what it means to have this ideal look. And I think it's really interesting what you're saying is how, you know, there's a disconnect right now, especially in the dance industry, between what the audience is ready for versus what dancers are ready for. And, you know, hopefully we can see progression. Like you said, yeah, there are some individual dancers who are beginning to change this conversation, but is the industry really ready for it? Is the audience ready for it? That's, I think, what's going to be even harder to have to change.
I think moving forward, we're going to have some serious clashes over that. Like, serious. Like I heard someone say recently, they were like, I'm not buying season tickets to anybody's season at the Met until I see a size 12 girl on stage. I was like, you're gonna be waiting a while, just being honest.
Sure.
I would love that. I would love that. But if we're keeping it 100, if we're keeping it, you know, a buck, it's going to be a minute before that happens. Not nobody's ready for it, but because the powers that be move at such a glacial pace that I'm not sure. I think my children will be old enough to, our children will be old enough to take to the Met and see, you know, performances by the time that happens. And part of me is not super, I don't mean to be fatalistic, but part of me is not super hopeful about that. But so much of what we love about ballet and what is beautiful about ballet is predicated on an audience's idea of the ideal woman and ideal beauty. But I think it's interesting that so many of these choreographers, there's lots of choreographers out there who say they love a womanly body, but then don't cast these womanly bodies, or the womanly bodies they cast could still probably convincingly walk a runway.
Sure.
You know, and like, it's been odd to me to kind of watch that like change a little bit over the past few years. Like, you know, when I think it's odd that when we think of curvy dancers, we think of women who could still convincingly walk a runway.
Yeah.
And like when we think about, but this also calls into question what the idea of success is as a dancer. When we talk about successful dancers, and, you know, it doesn't just mean employed a lot of the time. It means employed at the Met, or employed at ABT, or employed at City Ballet, or at one of the, you know, major regional companies around the country. What we consider success as a dancer also kind of has to change, because it's not just ballet, it's modern dance too. You know, there are lots of modern companies that have looked the exact same for the last 40 years, and that's a problem.
Absolutely.
You know, your company isn't reflecting the city or the times or the nation, then you need to step back and think about what you're doing. And I think, you know, we kind of hold up some of these companies as being suitably diverse, but, you know, all the women could share clothes in that company if they wanted to.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And also it really questions the idea of how accessible is something like dance to the wider audience. And this is something that I spoke with Evelyn Tremblay on Friday night, who's the co-author of Intuitive Eating, and she brought up a really good point. You know, this movement that's not quite in the dance industry, it's really pushing back on diet culture, the health at every size, or HASTE movement. What it's about is access and bringing more access to other populations. And it's not just of varying body types, but it's also underserved populations. Right. And I know you do a lot of advocacy in that realm as well.
Now, there's a gap there, though. We are really moving towards excellence in terms of access and, you know, reaching underserved. And let's just be clear, whenever white folks talk about underserved, they mean Black and brown children. They mean poor and working class Black and brown children.
Right.
Ballet is moving towards a standard of excellence in reaching underserved populations. The gap comes when those, you can go into, I'm originally from the DC area, so I'll use my area as an example. I'm not from the hood, but, you know, I know where it is. So when the Washington Ballet goes into Anacostia, the Anacostia neighborhood, and teaches Black and brown children ballet, you know, you're teaching 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds the fundamentals of ballet. Of course it's wonderful. Of course they're good at it. They're small children. What about when those Black girls become young Black women? What about when those Black girls go through puberty earlier than white girls? Because that is the medical truth in this country for a lot of people at this point in time. What happens when those young Black girls who were successes and stars in your 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old class go through puberty, become Black women who no longer have the body you consider standard.
Sure.
That we are, countries all around the country, companies all around the country, are moving towards a place of just excellence and kind of, enthusiasm with reaching young children of poor and working class children of color, especially. But what happens when their bodies no longer look like what you consider appropriate for ballet? That's the problem. Like we're not having a problem reaching people anymore. That's not the issue. Ballet is almost, I would argue that ballet is more accessible, as an art form, both visually and, the practice of it now more than ever. But the gap comes at that. And that's when we really need to get into the ugly conversations about Black bodies, and I'm talking specifically as a woman and as a girl, because that's my experience. But Black girls and women in their bodies versus a balletic ideal. Absolutely. That nobody wants to talk about that. They love posting these pictures of these beautiful little Black and brown children getting, a classical ballet education. Where do those Black and brown children go after they no longer?
I think that is so interesting and such a good point about the idea, again, something that I haven't thought about, that gap, that major gap in age differences of where you're seeing with these Black and brown children in regards to starting at a young age, not hitting puberty yet, eventually hitting puberty, like you said, at usually an earlier time than their white peers, and then there being this disconnect. And what happens from there? Where is the access at that age? Where is the diversity and the representation? So talk to me a little bit.
That's only so far. Access goes as far as, ballet is willing to bend its body ideals. So this little girl may be in your program from the time she's 6 until she's 11, but by the time she's 11, she's blossomed, she's growing into a woman, and she does not look like the woman you want on stage. And so that is, and the children you see in these programs do not become the Black dancers that they have in these companies. In very rare situations, extremely rare. And it's normally not at these major white companies. Dance Theater of Harlem has, pioneered outreach. And that's why children stay in their school. They come into the company. Dance Theater of Harlem is the paramount in that regard. But when we're talking about other similarly prestigious companies, they kind of fall out after a certain age. And I think that's what nobody is going to say. No one's going to say that, oh, we have a certain body standard that everybody cannot fit. And these children that we spent the last few years building our advertising on and building our fundraising on do not fit. And that's the issue. I think there will be and it's cyclical. This is what systemic racism does to our genre. Young Black girls often go through puberty. This is science. I'm not just, pulling this out of my, like, young Black girls go through puberty earlier than white girls because in many situations, the quality of their food is not as good as that of their white peers, especially when you talk about poor and working class neighborhoods, single parent homes. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but because the quality of their food is not always as good or as closer to organic as that of their white peers, the hormones are likely to, send earlier. And that is systemic racism. That is generational poverty. That is generational trauma. And all of that ends with this very sweet little 9-year-old girl wondering why she can't be accepted to the school when she's been taking ballet these last, 4 or 5 years, is good at it, loves it, and now they're telling her she can't go. I've seen it happen.
Absolutely.
I'm prevented from, telling the story because this is somebody's life. Obviously, it's somebody's personal business, but I have watched it happen with my own 2 eyes. And I have watched other Black girls be admitted because they are this big and have stayed this big. And then have watched them be devastated when puberty finally does come and they no longer fit. I have seen young dancers, we're talking 15, 16 years old, all of a sudden puberty hit. They were the darlings at YAGP 2 years ago. All of a sudden puberty finally hits when they're 15, 16, and now they don't dance anymore because they weren't getting parts or they weren't getting the same attention. I have watched it happen over and over again, and it infuriates me every single time. But that's what happens, and that's what nobody wants to say or talk about because it's painful and it's personal and it feels like your body has betrayed you.
Absolutely.
And to watch that happen to somebody so young, like 14, 15, 16, these are babies. Like, I think in ballet, we adultify these girls so young because they have so much responsibility and ballet requires so much discipline, but they are small babies. Like, they're 14, 15, 16 years old. Like, are they mature? Sure. Are they mentally and emotionally like mature for their age? Sure, but they're still children.
100%. Yeah. Uh, you know, it's so interesting because even there is a certain level of privilege and one of the reasons why one of the first questions I always ask just anyone who I'm interviewing is, you know, when did diet culture infiltrate you or infiltrate your life in any which way? And I think there's a certain level of privilege for a lot of white people out there where diet culture has not infiltrated until they're older, and exactly what you're saying is that's not the case with Black and brown children.
And I think in our communities, it's very different. There's been lots of studies on the differences in body image perception between Black women and girls and white women and girls, and what our body standards are in a Black household versus what they are in a white household. Now, I came from a household in which, you know, my mom was very size conscious, you know, was kind of always dieting, unfortunately. And so from a young age, I grew up with a fat phobic attitude for sure. Not my favorite thing. Obviously, we plan on doing differently with our children, but it was that was the truth of my existence. And, you know, I was a chubby kid and I got a lot of heat for it from like family members, friends, dance teachers. And it's actually interesting, when I was 12, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which later we found out was with Asperger's syndrome, with the autism spectrum disorder. But I was prescribed Adderall, and which I've, you know, had for my ADHD for, you know, many years now. So whoever I saw that right after I hadn't seen for a while, my old dance teacher from my studio, the first thing she said to me, keep in mind I'm 12, the first thing she said to me, she was like, "You look incredible. What happened?"
Oh God.
And I couldn't answer her. I was 12, and right. I wasn't necessarily paying attention to all the weight that I'd lost, but all of a sudden I was cute again.
Oh God. Yeah.
And so I think the danger of diet culture when it comes to our children is teaching them that the size of their bodies is not only worth knowing or mentioning, but something that can change the way people treat you.
Yeah.
I hate that a lot. And so I think that is, even outside of dance, I think the dangers of diet culture there when it comes to our children are more than obvious.
100%. And I also hear from a lot of parents really get very nervous about the idea of the word fat.
I am flying by the seat of my yoga pants here, friend. I have, yeah, especially if what makes me nervous, my wife and I keep joking that we hope we have a boy first, because I can handle talking about a body with a boy.
Yeah.
He will grow up to be a man. If he inherits my genes, he will probably be, you know, bulky and muscular. That'll be fine. He's a boy.
Right.
I am so nervous to have a daughter of my own, even though I've always wanted a little girl. I'm so nervous because I don't know how to not talk about weight and looks with her in a way that is not damaging. I'd rather just not mention. At this point, I was telling my wife the other day, I was like, I'd rather just not mention it. Mm-hmm. I'd rather not even have her looks be a thing.
Yeah.
But I'm also like, I know that there will be a certain amount of privilege because she's probably going to be thin. She probably will be. You know, that's just the reality of genetics. That's how that works. And it makes me nervous. I don't want her to think she's better than anybody because she's thin. I don't want her to think she's better than anybody for any reason. I don't want to give her a complex about her body. And like, there are books out there that I plan on reading the minute I find out I'm pregnant that like teach me how to do that. But that is something that like that keeps me awake at night, is thinking, you know, how do I give my daughter confidence? How do I not give her a complex about her body? How do I just teach her how it works and how it's supposed to work? You know, so proud to be a woman. You know, how do I do that versus kind of what was done with me via my parents, teachers, you know, everybody.
Yeah, it's not easy. I will say I have, you know, my son is 4, my daughter is 6 months. So the interesting thing is that my son came home from school, it's about a couple weeks ago, and he doesn't know what he's saying, he's 4 years old, starts kind of like pointing to things and saying the word fat and laughing. So this is something that came from school. This is not something that comes from my house. And I'm like, okay, now I'm thinking to myself, okay, how do I like figure this out now, because I don't like this. And it's not that I don't want him using this word. I want to teach him that this word is not necessarily a bad thing. So, and that's what I'm trying to do. I can control what's in my household. I can't control what's in school. And that's what kills me.
I think that's what makes me nervous too. What I trust though is my instinct as a mother to fight anybody who like, you know,
Yeah,
brings that to my child.
absolutely.
Like that's what I trust as like, as you know, as I kind of prepared to shift from, you know, just Sydney myself to Sydney somebody's mama, like is my instinct to just go straight to the mat with whoever brings that to my kid. Because and I plan on, like, something I was talking to my wife about again weeks ago, thinking that like I'm gonna set that boundary early with everybody. It's like, fat is not a bad word in our house. Fat is not a bad word around our child. If
Yeah,
you call a child fat, I will hit you. Like there's, you know, there's very, you know, we plan on setting very clear boundaries.
yeah,
I think that is what is crucial, because you can't control every environment your kid is going to be in. And I think that brings us even back to ballet. It's like, how do you, if you're going to, if you end up having a child who pursues ballet, how do you send them into the studio every day knowing that their body is enough just as it is, that
yes,
they don't change anything, and that the minute somebody says something to them, they walk out the door? Like the courage to walk away is, I think, what I did not have in a lot of situations as a young dancer, what I only developed as an adult, like not even just like an adult, like 18 or 21. I'm talking like maybe 26 or 27. And I'll
sure.
now like thinking about when do I have the power to walk away? The answer is every single time. Like, when do I have the power to leave that room and leave that conversation and leave that influence for my own well-being and for my own mental health? And I think that's what my wife and I are very, very intentional about passing on to our children, is the, you know, especially when it comes to their bodies or their selves, their confidence, you know, anything that we would consider either a, you know, mental, emotional, or moral hazard to them.
Yeah.
Way. And that's something I had in every other area of my life. That's something I had, is like the current, like, you know, I was very goody two shoes as a kid. Like if something was going wrong, I knew that I you know what, I'm leaving, I'm out, bye. Like
Yeah.
there was in which I knew something was wrong and I didn't want to be a part, so I just walked out. And that was my parents' moral instruction for me. But when it came to things about my body or my self-image or my confidence, that kind of thing, I didn't feel like I had the power to walk away. So that's something I feel like I'll have to teach very intentionally to our kids.
Okay, and I think that there's also two things here that I just want to talk to you about, is the courage to walk away and build like a suit of armor against it. But then what about the next step? What about the courage to actually have a voice, which is what you're using your platform for? Like that's a whole nother,
It's a next level. It's
it's
a
an,
next interacting, I think. And I think, but it also depends on the personality of your child or the personality of whoever it is you're coaching or mentoring. You know, like I've had mentees in the past, I've had students, you know, I've taught. And so I think you have to, that this is a situation where you really have to know, if you're talking about yourself, you really have to know yourself and what you're comfortable with. And if you're talking about your child or your student or your mentee or whomever, you have to know them. It's like, are they better off walking away now and bringing it up in private later? Or are they better off just flaming the whole situation right now? Are they better off just like, you know, just straight savage right here, right now? Like just, they love chaos.
right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the unfortunate truth about, just to really bring it into the dance industry, is just the hierarchy of power. And I think a lot of younger dancers, probably more so younger Black dancers, Black and brown dancers, being truly fearful of the idea of speaking out.
I think that is fading out a little bit. I feel like I'm seeing, but I have seen that in my time, maybe when I was that same age.
Right.
I am oddly, I'm not a fearless person, but when something is wrong, like I have a very hard time not saying something or not at least speaking up in the moment. Like I'll remove myself from a situation, but then, you know, I will flame you on social media, or I'll
Uh,
smoke you in person. You know,
we're,
I'm a Scorpio. We're just mean people. But I try to use my powers for good. Um,
yeah.
I think the issue nowadays, and by nowadays I actually mean pre-COVID, because I think since the pandemic and since the events of last summer, that people's patterns are changing, especially Black dancers. Our patterns are changing. We can't afford to be silent anymore.
Right.
We're, you know, sick and tired. It's a sick and tired of being sick and tired situation.
Yeah.
But pandemic, I can't tell you, Rachel, over the years how many DMs I've gotten, you know, this racist incident happened to me. I don't know what to do. You know, this person, you know, the person who said it is in charge of giving out roles for Nutcracker, blah, blah, blah. You know, I heard that story repeated time after time after time after time from these young Black dancers who, you know, are otherwise dynamic young women who are scared to speak up to their almost always white, sometimes also male directors and teachers who have an influence over, you know, the roles they get in Nutcracker or the roles they get at the end of semester. And that we know how that can make or break a career or a summer intensive prospect or, you know, anything. And I think a lot of these older white directors are skating by because people are too scared of them. We saw that kind of firsthand with City Ballet a couple of years ago. And, you know, people are too scared to tell these white men, I'm not the one. But when a Black woman does it, it's combative, it's sassy, angry. And I think that threw people for a loop with me because I'm not an angry person. You know, I also, my privilege here is that I'm thin and small and light-skinned and, you know, well-educated. So my voice saying I'm not the one and that's not okay sounds different than a bigger girl or a darker skinned girl or, you know, a less well-educated girl. That, like, so my voice saying this is not okay, you are going to be held accountable, sounds very different from the people who actually need to be able to say that. Because, you know, we're sitting here talking about thin privilege. I'm a Black woman, but I'm light-skinned.
Yeah.
You know, I move through the world with a different, you know, interaction with men, with white men, with Black men. You know, white men do not fear me when I walk up to them, but white men are trained to see darker skinned Black women in a different light. So when I get into that space and I'm telling you it's not okay, maybe you're going to listen to me. And that is the point. That's the problem. And I think me being able to say that and not necessarily, I don't take any credit for anybody's eyes being opened. Everybody, you know, you have control over your own viewpoints and your but I wonder if darker skinned dancers but darker skinned dancers do speak up. Let me be very clear. Darker skinned dancers do speak up, but they're thin.
Sure.
I have yet to see a truly plus size, if that's the terminology we're using. I have yet to see a fat, dark skinned ballet dancer speak up about anything. I have yet to see a fat, dark skinned ballet dancer in any of the places I want to see her, which is everywhere.
Yeah.
Because of all the reasons that we've discussed up to right now. But it depends, you know, who is speaking up is just as political as speaking up itself. And so it, you know, we find ourselves stuck, I think, as a discipline and as an industry with, well, how do we change who's making these decisions, you know, who gets to be in those rooms. And, you know, Takia Wallace McMillan, the founder of Brown Girls Do Ballet, she and I have been in a lot of meeting rooms together. You know, we have heard a lot of BS from a lot of folks. And we'd be here all day if I told you some of the things we heard, and I can't even tell you some of the things we heard. But Black people need to be in those rooms, is what I'm saying. You know, Black people need to be in the decision-making rooms of places like ABT, places like City Ballet, places even like the Royal Ballet in London, or, you know, the Royal Danish. Black people need to be in those rooms and in those spaces, challenging what we think of as a normative ballet body, because we don't get, people are like, well, where are they? They're here. You're kicking them out of your program because they gained.
Sure.
Like, that's the truth. You're kicking them out of your programs.
You know, exactly. It's a matter of getting them on the boards, right? To play a role and to not be saturated by the, you know, the privileged white male stereotypical artistic director. That's fascinating. Sydney, when did you really start wanting to, or maybe it happened naturally, using your platform for exactly this, to somewhat, even though, as you're saying, you know, it maybe feel like as some bit of a privileged voice, but when did you start to do that?
I think it's hard to pinpoint. It felt like, at the time, it felt like a natural progression. It's hard to pinpoint when or if anything, you know, triggered me to start saying more about what I went through or what I was seeing other people go through. Because at the beginning, I have, very few secrets in terms of like, what I'm going through or what I'm dealing with. But at the beginning, if you scroll all the way back to the beginning of my Instagram, I was deep in my eating disorder, deep in diet culture. I was talking about all the weight I lost. I was talking about having a normal ballet body. And after I want to say, maybe I'm not even sure it happened until after I got married or maybe close to my wedding, because I realized, I think two things, I'm not sure if either of these things are necessarily like the catalyst for what happened, but two things I can think about happened. I went to buy my wedding gown, and my wedding gown is hanging in my closet. I can show you the tag if you don't believe me, and I remember having two feelings at that moment. I was so proud of myself. Why am I proud of that? And what does that mean? Like,
to even get to that point and to actually sustain that, was that even something that was possible?
It was not fun. It was certainly not. And then I remember I had a coaching session with a dancer who I very much respect. I won't name her out of respect for her privacy, but a coaching session with a dancer whom I very much respect, who is about, not necessarily twice my age, but older than me. Like probably, 10, 15 years between us. And I was talking negatively about my body and how much I hated it and how much I wanted to change it. And she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. She was like, just don't let your periods lapse. Don't let that happen. And I was confused because we hadn't been talking about that. And I was wondering, and she was like, don't sacrifice your ability to have children.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. That hit me like a ton of bricks, because she then told me, she was like, there's a reason my husband and I don't have kids.
Oh, wow.
I sacrificed my body on, this altar of ballet, ideal body, and now children. And that scared the absolute shit out of me. And I was like, because all I've ever, I've had other, professional or academic ambitions in my life, but at the core of my, purpose on earth, I have always wanted to be a mother. Like, right. Since that was my first desire as a child, was to be a mom. And to hear her say that her passion for ballet and she, one of the most incredible dancers I've ever seen. It's wild that she never got signed with like a bigger, larger, major company, but one of the most incredible dancers I've ever seen. She didn't even have the typical success we talk about as a ballet dancer. She had other successes, surely, she danced with smaller companies and was incredible. But to have not even reached that peak of success that we consider as ballet dancers, and to have sacrificed her ability to have children for it, I was like, nah, I can't do it. This ain't it. At that moment, I was like, oh, there is no way. There is no way. And I became frightened. I was like, if I ever came to a point where I couldn't have children because of what I've done to my body in the name of ballet, I would never forgive myself.
Right.
Those two moments for me were like, I should be looking at things differently.
Yeah. Wow. That's, pretty, I don't know if this is the best word, but lucky to have someone like her open your eyes in that sense.
It was fateful. I'll say that. It was fateful to have her open my eyes that way, to use her tragedy to instruct me, essentially. And part of me, looking back now with kind of a clearer perspective on a lot of the last 8 years, looking back now, I continue to wonder if I was truly happy as a dancer, because so much of this, this last year has been so difficult for all of us, but I have had so many like personal, kind of revelations, and, spent a lot of time with my wife, got to spend, lots of time at home doing other things that I love, and have experienced, thinking that like, this is great. Like, this might be where bliss is for me. Yeah. I'm not sure that I ever felt that way when I was dancing. And that was a wake-up call for me, thinking that like, wow, I spent a solid portion of my life doing something that I had to, kind of beat my body into submission for, that wasn't making me 100% happy, hoping that success would make me happy, that the journey was not fun. It gave me discipline. It gave me a lot of gifts. It was not all bad, that's for sure. I made friends that I will have for the rest of my life, random bodily talents, like picking shit up with my feet, like, random stuff like that.
Wait until you have a baby too. You'll be holding a baby, picking stuff up with your feet at the same time.
And it gave me so much, but it also took so much from me. And I think what I am always telling younger dancers is the minute it starts to take things from you is the minute you need to consider whether or not you want to stick around.
Oh my God, I love that so much because I can relate to that on a personal level. Like when I look in hindsight to when I was dancing full time and the amount of um, I guess pain is the word of my own body dysmorphia, never feeling like I'm enough, never that word success, how we define success. If only I had known what I know now in the sense that you can have a fulfilling career without perhaps dancing in those major companies. You can have aspects of your career feel very fulfilling. I just wish I saw that while I was dancing full time because I think I would have been such a better dancer. I always held myself back.
That literally yesterday I was thinking like, wow, if I had had the kind of not abandon, but like the freedom that my body has experienced in this pandemic, like wearing, wearing, leggings all day long, hoodies every day, just chilling, like, just really chilling hard this entire pandemic. Like and, kind of eating whatever I felt like, and I'm not somebody who like kind of pigs out on things. I just like an ice cream cone twice a week instead of just on my birthday.
Right.
Like, I why did I ever have a rule? Like my number one favorite sweet in the world is donuts.
Mm.
There's like last year, right before everything shut down, a donut place opened up around the corner from our house.
Which one?
Absolutely delicious, super nice. It's up here in Harlem. They opened, I want to say they opened right before everything shut down last year, but like getting donuts once a week instead of having to wait a year between donuts.
Right.
So dumb. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I previously had lots of rules around food.
Yeah.
And so I had one donut every year on my birthday, and that was it. It is my number one favorite food in the world. Why was I like restricting that? And that really brought it all into perspective. And, I kind of had to apologize to my wife for all the ways that, my career, my passion as a dancer has kind of derailed and, upended our life. And I caution young dancers with that too. They're like, if you don't fix it before you get into a long relationship with someone, it's going to come back and bite you in different ways, because everybody's different and they have different relationship dynamics, but like it will take over your life in the most insidious and unexpected of ways. And when it comes back to you, you won't know how to deal.
Yeah. Also, the importance of this going into kids and not wanting. One thing when I had my son almost 4.5 years ago was I was like, I need to make sure whatever, because even by the way, again, dietetics being so drenched in white privilege and white elitism, every dietetic student is going through the program with their own journey of disordered eating. And I remember when I got pregnant, just this idea of like being thrown into intuitive eating, and because I physically couldn't follow these rules anymore that I had for myself. And yeah,
I'm kind of looking forward to being pregnant for that reason. I was like, this will also allow me to accompany my body on a journey of creation of the one thing that I have always truly wanted,
yeah.
And having that be, having a healthy baby be my reward for losing those rules and losing, that kind of battle with whatever disordered eating I've been dealing with my entire life, and to have a whole brand new outlook on my body and what it can do, like
Yeah.
that. Actually looking forward to. Makes me nervous for sure, but also looking forward to it.
Yeah, you realize how selfish it can feel when you're amidst all of these food rules and disordered eating, and then when you're going through something like pregnancy and realizing that it's not just about you anymore, and you are, creating this life. Your whole perspective can change in regards to your relationship with food, but also, most importantly, your relationship with your body.
Right.
Yeah.
And it makes me nervous. I'm not sure, because my body, like everybody else's, has changed during the pandemic. Another larger change of growing a whole human being from scratch is going to be big.
Yeah.
Big for anybody, but it will be big for me because of what I've been through personally. I'm looking forward to it, but I also have to, there's points in your life where you have to get really still and quiet with yourself and wonder and like kind of face whatever it is you've been dealing with, for your sake, but also for the sake of your child.
Yeah, sure. Sydney, I honestly can talk to you all day. I can talk to you all day.
afternoon. If we
I have a question though. Just for any young dancers who are listening, this is a bit of a loaded question, but do you have maybe one or two pieces of advice for them if they are, whether they are feeling oppressed in any way or, at this pivotal point where they don't know if they want to speak out or continue to dance? Any piece of advice that you can give?
talk to a trusted older dancer. If you are Black, talk to a trusted older Black dancer. If you are Asian, talk to an Asian dancer. Latino, all that. If you are in that space, talk to an older dancer who you trust, or find an older dancer who you feel like you can trust, and pour your heart out, because it's not going to do you any good to be quiet about what you're dealing with. Parents aren't always going to understand. Parents are wonderful. Obviously, some parents have, better, deeper, stronger relationships with their young people than others, but if you're the young dancer in question, be discerning. Think about the adult who is least likely to judge you, who will be, kindest to whatever your fears are, and go find them and say, I need to talk to you. It's important. I just need you to let me just dump all of this on you, because it's not going to do you any good to keep it in. And you want to, and if you don't feel like you can talk to an adult, come find me. I'm on the internet. I have had lots of DMs over the years from young dancers who are like, I'm not sure what to do at this point. And I've been able to either, point them in a direction that makes sense, or just sometimes you just have to sit with somebody in their grief and in their, suffering until you figure out what the next logical step is. Sometimes you just need a witness. You don't need a problem solver. You don't always need a fixer. Sometimes you just need a witness. And that matters just as much as somebody who can fix or somebody who can help. So find that person. And, if it's your best friend, I recommend seeking out somebody older, because if your friend is your age mate, they're likely to be going through some similar stuff. And that's not always, two storms kind of make a hurricane. So that's not always the best idea. I recommend finding someone older who has either been through what you've gone through, or who you think will just be, helpful or useful. And just be honest, be for real, admit whatever it is that you've been hiding, find somebody that you can be completely, totally non-judgmentally honest with.
Yeah.
Get you through, because you can't hold that all by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much, Sydney. This has been incredible. I really cannot thank you enough for your time, and for helping me address these issues, because as I said, I'm learning myself in my own anti-racism work, and you've honestly played a big role in that, in just me following you. So anyone who's listening, I really do encourage that you go over and follow Sydney, because it's also just not about, your platform's about so much, being part of the gay community as well, and we didn't really get a chance to talk about that, but maybe
Another one.
these are such big issues that they deserve their own conversations.
Yeah, they are. I'm so glad that we had time to make this happen. We will definitely do another one. I'm glad that we've been on the internet together all these years. And it's so good to see you succeeding at, making this, this world of eating, this world of disordered eating, and this, the world of becoming a whole person aside from your relationship with food, and including your relationship with food. It's been so good to see you really succeed at that. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Sydney. Likewise, and we will talk soon. Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.